Imagine this. You are Marcus Silanus, a Roman senator, and it is the summer of 27 after Christ. Your hands tremble as you clutch the imperial summons bearing Tiberius's seal. You stand on a wooden dock in the Bay of Naples, watching a galley approach through morning mist. The oarsmen row in perfect silence, their faces showing carefully hidden terror. The island of Capri rises from the Mediterranean like a fortress, nearly 500 feet of sheer limestone cliffs. The emperor has been there for over a year, ruling the greatest empire in history from this isolated speck barely 7 miles around. He refuses to return to Rome, refuses to explain why he abandoned the capital for self-imposed exile. What you don't know is that you will leave this island changed, if you leave at all. The things you are about to witness will haunt you for whatever remains of your life. The galley bumps the dock and you board in silence. As the cliffs loom larger, you notice something disturbing. There are no fishing boats near the island, no merchant vessels, no pleasure craft. The waters around Capri are completely empty, as if every sailor has learned to avoid this place. Tiberius Julius Caesar Augustus was not always a monster. He served with distinction under Augustus, commanding legions that conquered Germania. He was a capable administrator, a man who understood duty and honor. But something broke inside him during his years as emperor. Perhaps the constant paranoia. Perhaps his son Drusus's death in 23 after Christ, poisoned by rivals. Perhaps absolute power simply revealed what always lurked beneath his disciplined exterior. By 26 after Christ, Tiberius could no longer tolerate Rome. The Senate disgusted him with its fawning sycophancy. The cliff dropped 300 feet to churning water below. Perfect for a man with things to hide, your galley reaches the harbor. Guards in plain tunics watch with neutral expressions. One gestures toward steep stone stairs carved into rock. You climb, legs burning, Mediterranean heat crushing, sweat soaking your toga. The steps seem endless, winding upward in dizzy switchbacks. You reach the top. Villa Jovis spreads before you, marble buildings connected by colonnaded walkways. The architecture is Greek, elegant columns and courtyards capturing sea breezes. Beautiful mosaics cover floors. Painted frescoes show mythological scenes. Everything appears refined, exactly what you would expect from an emperor with Hellenic tastes. But something is wrong. The servants move too quietly. The air feels heavy with secrets. A steward leads you through marble corridors toward the audience chamber. You pass doorways opening onto rooms you cannot see into, glimpsing elaborate furnishings and strange equipment. Once you hear laughter, high-pitched and young, quickly stifled. The steward does not react, does not slow, pretends he heard nothing. You understand why senators who visit Capri return changed, speaking in careful euphemisms about the emperor's entertainments. Tiberius receives you overlooking the sea. He sits in a high-backed chair, his 68-year-old body still imposing. His face is heavily scarred from skin disease no physician has treated. He does not rise. His sharp eyes study you with intensity that makes your skin crawl. Next to him stands Thrasyllus, the Greek freedman who wields more influence than any patrician. The audience is brief. Tiberius asks about grain shipments, tensions in Syria, whether senators prove reliable. His questions are precise and informed. Whatever else he has become, his intelligence remains formidable. When discussion ends, he waves dismissively. The steward escorts you to guest quarters. You are staying the night. You have no choice. Here is where it gets disturbing. As you are led through the villa, you notice other guests. Young people, impossibly beautiful, wearing silk chitons. They lounge in courtyards, decorative and idle, like living statues. You assume they are slaves until you notice their eyes, hollow and distant. You recognize that expression from gladiators who survived too many matches, soldiers who witnessed too much horror. These beautiful young people are traumatized in ways you do not yet understand. Your chamber is luxurious: silk cushions, heated bath, fresh fruit and wine. Through your window you see Italy's coastline, impossibly far away. As evening falls, you hear sounds: music, laughter, splashing water. It could be any wealthy household enjoying entertainments. But the laughter sounds performative, desperate. The music has an edge of frenzy. You lie awake most of the night. Near dawn you drift off, and when you wake the sun is high. A servant informs you the emperor granted permission to explore before your afternoon departure. You wander colonnaded walkways, trying to convince yourself your discomfort is imagination. Then you pass an open doorway and glance inside. The chamber is decorated with frescoes more explicit than anything in Rome's most disreputable establishments. The paintings show elaborately staged scenes involving multiple figures in positions far beyond ordinary intimacy. Rendered with master skill, beautiful and grotesque simultaneously. Museum-quality pornography covering every wall. You realize these are not decorations, they are instructional images demonstrating specific techniques. This is a training facility disguised as art. Now that you have witnessed what was hidden in plain sight, if uncovering these revelations about Rome's most mysterious emperor feeds your hunger for understanding how absolute authority corrupts, subscribing ensures you never miss these deep dives into history's darkest moments. What comes next will shatter everything you thought you knew about imperial power. You stumble backward, heart racing. A servant appears and firmly guides you away. He explains those chambers are reserved for the emperor's entertainments. The word he uses is spintrii. Professional entertainers, he says, trained in specialized performances. Recruited from across the empire, brought to Capri for the emperor's particular tastes. The servant speaks as if describing ordinary staff, but his controlled tone reveals the abnormality. The spintriae are human props in elaborate staged scenarios. Suetonius, writing decades later, describes groups of 3 or more coupling in positions called spintriae after them. Tiberius created an entire vocabulary for his entertainments. The operation's scale becomes clear. Dormitories where performers live, separate wings by gender and age. Training rooms for choreographed performances. Physicians examining them regularly. A steward maintaining detailed records, tracking preferences and scheduling future entertainments. This is systematic, organized perversion. Tiberius transformed his retreat into a machine producing fantasies with human beings as mechanical parts. They cannot refuse, cannot escape. They are trapped on an island 500 feet above the sea. Natural grottos below the villa serve as outdoor venues. Archaeological excavations uncovered elaborate decorations, mosaic floors, and painted walls showing mythological scenes. Tiberius reclined on cushions in these natural theaters while spintriae acted out Greek myths. Leda and the swan, Europa and the bull, Ganymede and the eagle. Gods ravishing mortals, reenacted with human performers playing both divine and mortal roles. Pliny the Elder, writing in his Natural History, mentions Tiberius kept a vast library of erotic paintings and sculptures at Capri, collected from Greece and Egypt. These were not hidden in private chambers, they adorned public spaces throughout the villa, creating an atmosphere where explicit imagery was constant visual presence. The paintings served multiple purposes. They decorated the environment, demonstrated techniques to newer performers, and normalized behaviors that would be condemned as criminal anywhere else in the empire. Visitors passing through corridors could not avoid seeing these images, this deliberate assault on conventional morality. The scheduling system reveals the industrial nature of the operation. Different performers were assigned different days based on the emperor's rotating preferences. Some specialized in particular mythological reenactments. Others excelled at improvised scenarios. The most valued could anticipate Tiberius's desires without explicit instruction. These elite performers received better quarters, finer clothing, marginally improved treatment. This hierarchy created competition among the victims, ensuring they policed each other's performances rather than organizing resistance. But the performances were just the beginning. You are led past the bathing complex with multiple pools. The servant mentions the emperor particularly enjoys swimming, spending hours in water most days. Something in how he says this makes your stomach turn. You learn the full truth later, after returning to Rome and speaking with other senators. The pools are not just for exercise. Tiberius trained young boys, children as young as 7, to swim alongside him underwater. Suetonius records he called them his little fishes, his pisciculi. These children performed services while submerged as the emperor floated in warm water. Agents traveled throughout Italy identifying poor families with beautiful children. They offered substantial payments, enough to transform struggling circumstances. Parents were told their children would serve in the imperial household, a great honor securing their futures. Most never learned what that service entailed. The agents were skilled at identifying desperation, targeting families where hunger outweighed suspicion. Children were brought to Capri, housed in special quarters away from adult performers, trained for roles in the emperor's aquatic entertainments through gradual conditioning that began with innocent swimming lessons and evolved into something far darker. Seneca the Elder wrote about the revulsion educated Romans felt. In his Controversiae, he references powerful men corrupting innocents, using authority to satisfy appetites that natural law condemns. He could not be more explicit without risking death, but his disgust bleeds through careful rhetoric. Other contemporary writers left similar coded references, literary breadcrumbs documenting horror they dared not openly describe. Medical staff maintained records documenting children's physical condition. These documents were destroyed after Tiberius's death by officials desperate to distance themselves. But architectural evidence tells the story. Archaeologists identified rooms near the bathing complex housing young children, small sleeping platforms, low doorways, decorations showing playful dolphins meant to keep children calm and compliant. When Tiberius tired of a child, when they aged beyond his preferred range or showed trauma diminishing their appeal, they disappeared. Not released, not reassigned. They vanished, and new children arrived. Senators visiting Capri saw new faces among young servants every few months, never the same children twice. The eastern edge of Villa Jovis features a precipice, a sheer cliff dropping 300 feet to rocky shore. Suetonius records Tiberius had victims thrown from this height after extended tortures. Sailors waited below with boat hooks ensuring anyone surviving the fall did not survive the boats. The precipice was not reserved for criminals or political enemies. It became his preferred method of disposing anyone who displeased him, including children no longer serving his purposes. No trials, no legal process. The emperor's word was absolute on Capri. Remains washed ashore along the coastline. Local fishermen learned not to report them. The most famous victim was Melonia, a senator's wife summoned to Capri. What Tiberius wanted was clear. When she refused, he forced her to watch Spintria performances, attempting to break her resistance through humiliation. She continued refusing. Melonia returned to Rome and publicly accused the emperor of unnatural practices before taking her own life. Tiberius had her corpse thrown from the cliff posthumously, denying even burial rites. Tacitus records this in his Annals, one of few cases where he explicitly described Tiberius's behavior. If a senator's wife could be treated this way, no one was safe from imperial appetites. The emperor recognized no law, no moral restraint, no boundary between fantasy and reality. The systematic cruelty extended beyond sexual exploitation into pure sadism. Suetonius describes elaborate games of humiliation designed to break victims psychologically before destroying them physically. Victims were forced to drink large amounts of wine, then had their bladders tied to prevent relief, creating agonizing pressure culminating in either submission or death. These tortures were not spontaneous rage. They were carefully planned entertainments, scheduled into the emperor's daily routine like theatrical performances. The cliff always waited as the final act, but even these horrors paled compared to what Suetonius could barely describe. The historian writes that Tiberius trained infants still at mother's breast to pleasure him orally. The Latin phrase suggests practices so abominable Suetonius struggled to convey them without becoming obscene. This was not occasional perversion. This was systematic pedophilia organized at the highest level of Roman power. Nursery rooms at Villa Jovis identified by archaeologists confirm the architectural reality ancient sources describe. These chambers featured specialized furniture whose purpose becomes horrifying when you understand what occurred. Small raised platforms at adult height, restraining mechanisms disguised as decorative elements, elaborate ventilation systems for sounds the emperor did not want heard. Physical evidence matches literary testimony. The procurement system supplying Villa Jovis operated throughout the empire with bureaucratic efficiency. Provincial governors learned sending attractive children to Capri was an effective way to curry imperial favor. Letters of recommendation accompanied these human gifts, describing physical attributes and temperament with the clinical detachment of livestock catalogs. Military commanders bringing captured youth as gifts after successful campaigns knew such offerings could secure promotions or lucrative postings. Slave traders specialized in acquiring children matching Tiberius's known preferences, developing expertise in this particularly lucrative market segment. The entire apparatus of Roman administration bent toward feeding the emperor's appetites, with thousands of officials enabling crimes they would prosecute as capital offenses in any other context. Cassius Dio, writing 2 centuries later with access to imperial archives that earlier historians could not safely consult, describes the emperor's preferences at various ages in detail that suggests official record-keeping. The ranking system determining which victims were assigned which activities. Rewards offered to those who procured especially appealing candidates. His account confirms what happened on Capri was not hidden from government. It was documented, recorded, filed away in official records that subsequent emperors read and in some cases emulated. The bureaucracy of abuse operated in parallel to the bureaucracy of empire. This is perhaps the most disturbing legacy. Tiberius did not simply commit atrocities in isolated madness. He created a template demonstrating how absolute power could be exercised without restraint, how the machinery of state could be repurposed to serve personal perversions. Caligula spent time on Capri during his youth, learning from his great-uncle's example. The cancer, beginning on Capri, metastasized throughout the imperial system. The senators and officials who visited the island and witnessed its horrors faced an impossible choice. They could speak out, knowing that accusations against the emperor meant certain death. They could remain silent, becoming complicit in crimes that violated every principle they claimed to uphold. Or they could convince themselves that what they saw was somehow acceptable, that the emperor's power placed him beyond ordinary morality, that their duty to Rome required tolerating the intolerable. Most chose silence or complicity. A few, like Melonia, chose defiant death. None chose effective resistance. You came to this story thinking Tiberius was simply an eccentric recluse who preferred scholarly pursuits to the political theater of Rome. Now you leave understanding that his retreat to Capri enabled systematic abuse on a scale that remained unmatched in Roman history until later emperors outdid him. This transformation of perspective, from ignorance to knowledge, from comfortable myths to uncomfortable truths, is exactly why these hidden histories demand examination. If having this insider knowledge of how power corrupts empowers you to recognize similar patterns in your own world, subscribing keeps you ahead of the curve while others believe sanitized versions of history. The final years of Tiberius's life saw him retreat even further into his private world. He stopped receiving most visitors entirely. He communicated with Rome through written dispatches, ordering executions and confiscations without bothering to justify his commands. The Senate rubber-stamped every decision, too terrified to question an emperor who had demonstrated that distance provided no protection from his reach. When Tiberius finally died in March of 37 after Christ, possibly smothered by Caligula's agents, Rome celebrated openly. The Senate debated whether to deny him divine honors. His legacy was so toxic that officials destroyed records and demolished structures associated with his reign. Villa Jovis fell into ruin. Later emperors avoided Capri, the island too closely associated with Tiberius's depravities. The local population told horror stories about the ghosts of children wandering the cliff tops, searching for justice that never came. Medieval Christians saw the ruined villa as evidence of divine judgment against pagan wickedness. Modern archaeologists excavating the site have uncovered evidence that confirms the worst accounts from ancient sources, physical proof of systematic abuse preserved in stone and tile. The truth about what happened on Capri forces us to confront uncomfortable realities about power, complicity, and institutional enabling of predatory behavior. Tiberius was not an anomaly, not a uniquely depraved individual whose crimes were impossible to predict or prevent. He was the logical outcome of a system that concentrated absolute authority in one person, that eliminated meaningful oversight or accountability, that trained an entire governing class to prioritize their own survival over protecting the vulnerable. Every official who sent a child to Villa Jovis, every senator who visited and stayed silent, every historian who knew the truth but wrote careful euphemisms instead of plain accusations, they all participated in the machinery of abuse. The patterns Tiberius established on Capri echo through history. Powerful men creating private spaces beyond public scrutiny. Sophisticated procurement systems supplying victims. Institutional complicity from those who benefit from staying in the powerful man's favor. Careers and reputations destroyed for speaking out while the predator continues operating with impunity. The Roman Senate of 30. After Christ and the institutional structures of our own era share more commonalities than we find comfortable acknowledging. The capacity for systematic evil has not disappeared from human civilization. It merely waits for circumstances that allow it to flourish. The children who suffered at Villa Jovis left behind no writings of their own. What we know of them comes solely from the accounts of those who harmed them and the silent evidence left in stone. Their names have vanished. Their personal stories are gone. They remain only as nameless figures in the broader account of imperial excess. This absence is a second injustice, adding the loss of identity to the suffering they endured. We remember Tiberius, his name etched in marble and echoed in countless historical records. We forget the Pasiculi, the little fishes, whose lives were consumed to satisfy his desires. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Capri's legacy is how easily it could have continued, had Tiberius lived longer. No law or institution stood ready to restrain an emperor's will. Only death or force could bring it to an end. Moral outrage alone changed nothing. Senatorial dignity meant nothing. Roman law meant nothing. Only power mattered, and power was precisely what enabled the horrors in the first place. This is the inescapable logic of absolute authority. Once you grant someone unlimited power over others, you grant them the power to destroy, corrupt, and brutalize without limit. Your hands no longer tremble as you board the galley that will carry you back to the mainland. You are numb, hollowed out by what you have witnessed and understood. The other senators waiting at the dock in Naples will ask about your visit. You will smile and speak of the emperor's health, his continued attention to imperial affairs, the beauty of the island villa. You will not mention the spintrii or the pools or the precipice or the children who vanish in the night. You will join the conspiracy of silence that allows these horrors to continue. Because speaking truth means death, and you want to live, even though you are no longer certain what kind of man survives knowledge like yours. The island of Capri remains, a popular tourist destination famous for its natural beauty and ancient ruins. Visitors climb the same steps you climbed, photograph the views from Villa Jovis, Admire the craftsmanship of Roman engineering. Tour guides mention that Tiberius lived there, usually adding that ancient historians may have exaggerated his vices for political purposes. The comfortable explanation, the sanitized version, the lie we tell ourselves to avoid confronting what humans with unlimited power actually do when no one can stop them. But you know the truth now. The villa was not a retreat. It was a factory for producing suffering, staffed by victims and enabled by an empire that valued stability over justice, order over morality, the comfort of the powerful over the survival of the powerless.